powerful leaders in the galaxy sit in silence, while entire worlds begin to die. One human, just a civilian envoy, refused to stand by. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't follow the rules. She dragged the highest ruler in the universe by the collar, straight into history. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to this channel and show some love with a thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's dive into this incredible story that changed the stars forever. Lenara Vale wasn't a soldier, a spy, or even a high-ranking official. She was a civilian envoy, technically just a temporary diplomatic observer, sent by Earth to attend Unity Forum sessions on Helion Prime. But on that day, every camera in the galaxy captured the moment she stormed through the polished obsidian halls of the Galactic Assembly, dragging the Supreme Chancellor of the Triumvirate by the collar of his ceremonial robe. The Chancellor, leader of the most powerful political body in the known universe, was sputtering in disbelief as he stumbled behind her, the golden embroidery of his robe scraping the floor. Delegates froze. Security bots hovered, unsure of what to do. Some alien ambassadors gasped in outrage, while others began transmitting live feeds back to their home worlds. But Lenara didn't slow down. Her grip was firm, her pace steady, her expression unreadable. If the Chancellor struggled, she simply adjusted her hold and kept walking. "You can't do this," hissed Vrexil, her liaison from the Visari coalition. He scurried beside her on long, jointed legs, his voice clicking in panic. "This violates every protocol. This is illegal, insane, irrational." "It's necessary," Lenara replied calmly. "And I'm doing it anyway." No one had seen anything like it in centuries. The Unity Forum prided itself on decorum, on tradition, on taking its time. For over 5,000 years, decisions had been made through careful deliberation, with countless layers of approval and consultation. But that had stopped working a long time ago. This wasn't just about decorum anymore. Worlds were dying. The problem had started 3 weeks earlier, when Lenara had arrived on Helion Prime, a massive artificial planet designed to host intergalactic negotiations. She'd replaced a career diplomat who'd collapsed mid-session, after spending 12 consecutive hours in a subcommittee meeting about seating preferences for methane-breathing delegates. Lenara had no background in intergalactic policy. What she did have was a long track record of getting things done on Earth, usually in situations where no one else could figure out how to move forward. At first, she tried to play by the rules. She attended the meetings. She listened. She even wore the ridiculous ceremonial sashes assigned to new observers. But it quickly became clear that nothing real was happening. Planetary distress calls were received, reviewed, and shelved. Environmental data from over a dozen systems showed critical collapse, and the forum responded by scheduling discussion panels a month out. Delegates debated whether a planet's suffering qualified as a major or moderate emergency for 3 full days. Meanwhile, people, entire populations, were running out of time. Lenara submitted proposals. They were ignored. She filed requests for action. They were returned, unread, with notes about procedure. When she asked about the emergency response system, she was told that the committee overseeing those protocols had not been formed yet, pending a charter review. That morning, she'd woken up to the news that another world, Elisarth 4, had lost its last atmospheric stabilizer. 10 million people were being evacuated on ships that could only carry half that number. Still, the Unity Forum had refused to accelerate its timeline, so Lenara snapped. The Chancellor had just emerged from his private chamber, dressed in layers of gold and violet silk, preparing to open the day's proceedings. Lenara had approached him directly. "You need to sign an emergency order to release the planetary support units now," she'd said. He'd laughed gently, like a teacher amused by a child's question. "Miss Vale," he replied, "we cannot circumvent centuries of carefully balanced governance just because you're impatient." So she grabbed him by the robe and said, "Then let me show you why we don't have time for patience." She yanked him through the corridors as the crowd grew behind them. Dozens of species, hundreds of eyes, and at least 4 major news drones hovering to get the best angle. It was chaos wrapped in silence. No one dared stop her. And Lenara wasn't angry. She was focused. The Chancellor flailed, demanding to be released, but Lenara only tightened her grip. "You've had centuries to get this right," she said under her breath. "Now you'll see the consequences of getting it wrong." She was headed for the Grand Observatory, a vast glass chamber that overlooked deep space and could broadcast high-definition footage across the galaxy. It was the one place where she could force every delegate, every leader, every spectator to look at what they'd been ignoring, and the Chancellor was coming with her, like it or not. The silence in the chamber when they entered was immediate and heavy. As Lenara dragged him forward, her fingers tapping the emergency override into the control panel, even the automated systems hesitated for a beat before responding. The dome dimmed, the stars vanished. And in their place, a real-time image of LSR-4 flickered into view. Lenara let go of the Chancellor's collar at last. She didn't need to hold him anymore. The image did the work for her. On screen, the planet's skies swirled with thick, churning clouds. Storms spanned continents. Fires raged along fractured coastlines. Ships fled into orbit like insects scattering from a flood, and the population data flashed in red, warning that billions were at risk of displacement, starvation, or worse. Behind Lenara, no one spoke. Not even the Chancellor. She turned slowly to face them all and said, "This is what happens while you argue over nothing." That moment, the silence, the image, the calm defiance in her voice, would echo across systems for generations. And it all started because one civilian decided she wasn't going to wait for the rules to catch up with reality. Lenara Vale had never known silence to be so loud. In the grand halls of the Unity Forum, silence echoed off the polished stone, buried itself in the folds of ceremonial robes, and weighed heavily between carefully chosen diplomatic phrases. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It was the slow, dragging kind that wrapped itself around every urgent decision until it suffocated the meaning out of it. And for 3 long weeks, Lenara sat in it, listened to it, and tried not to scream. She had arrived on Helion Prime expecting slow progress, but nothing could have prepared her for this level of inaction. The forum looked impressive on the surface. High ceilings, floating chandeliers that shimmered with starlight, delegates from every known species dressed in their cultural best. But behind the shine, it was all delay and formality. Every topic, no matter how serious, was wrapped in layers of ritual and repetition. Lenara wasn't sure what had made her more exhausted by the end of the first week. The constant smiling through meaningless conversations, or the endless cycles of greetings that led nowhere. The first real warning sign came when she submitted her first proposal. It was a simple one. Deploy temporary climate shields to 3 frontier planets that were facing record atmospheric instability. She spent 2 days writing it, carefully using the official diplomatic language. She submitted it with the help of her liaison, Envoy Trisk, who assured her it would be reviewed promptly. 5 days later, she received a message saying the proposal had been received and was now under initial alignment analysis. She had no idea what that meant, and neither did Trisk. At the end of the second week, Lenara sat through a 9-hour session on terminology. Not action, not plans, just terminology. The delegates were debating whether to classify a system-wide drought on Velmora as a Type 2 emergent concern or a Stage 1 planetary irregularity. They spoke in circles, repeating phrases so carefully rehearsed that Lenara wondered if anyone even remembered what the issue was in the first place. And when she raised her hand to ask when help would actually arrive, the chairman politely reminded her that she had not yet earned speaking privileges in the core assembly. Behind her diplomatic smile, Lenara's jaw clenched. People were dying, while these leaders argued over labels. Still, she didn't give up. She tried again. She wrote more proposals, partnered with representatives who seemed willing to listen, and even made a presentation using real-time data on planetary damage. But every time she pushed, the answer was the same. "We appreciate your concern, Miss Vale, but we must follow proper channels." Proper channels, Lenara thought bitterly, were broken. By the start of the third week, Lenara began to change. She stopped attending the long luncheons filled with meaningless flattery. She declined invitations to diplomatic dance rituals and ignored the silent judgment of her absence. She spent her time in the archives instead, reviewing every emergency proposal filed in the last decade. The pattern was obvious. By the time any real help was approved, the situation it was meant to solve had already passed into disaster. She started asking questions. Quietly. Carefully. What if the forum just didn't work anymore? What if the structure that had held the galaxy together for centuries was too slow for the problems it faced now? That's dangerous thinking, Trisk warned her one night, glancing nervously around the quiet halls as they walked. People, trust the forum. It has brought stability for generations. Stability doesn't mean anything if it comes at the cost of lives, Lenara replied. What good is an emergency system that can't respond to emergencies? Trisk didn't answer. He was one of the good ones Lenara knew, loyal, well-meaning. But even he had grown comfortable in the quiet hum of procedure. Everyone here had. And the silence of the forum had become a shield, protecting them from ever having to act. The final straw came on the 20th day. Lenara received a report from her team on Earth. LSR-4, a green-blue world with dense forests and stormy oceans, had just lost control of its final weather regulation satellite. The planet's atmosphere was breaking apart. The local leaders had sent urgent messages requesting assistance. They needed power grids, stabilizers, evacuation transports, anything. Lenara brought the report directly to the speaker's chamber. She handed it to him, face pale and hands steady. We need to act now, she said simply. He glanced at the report, then nodded. Thank you for your dedication, Miss Vale. We will place it on the docket for next week's preparatory review. That was it. That was the moment. Something inside Lenara hardened. The silence she had endured for 3 weeks had done more than frustrate her. It had taught her something. If no one would speak loudly enough to save lives, then she would. If no one would act, she would move. And if the galaxy needed to see what delay truly looked like, she would show them. Later that day, as she stood at the Chancellor's chamber door, her hands ready, her voice calm, she wasn't thinking about laws or titles. She was thinking about every planet the Forum had failed to save, every leader who had chosen comfort over courage. It was time to break the silence. The doors to the Grand Observatory slid open with a soft hiss, and Lenara Vale stepped inside, dragging the Supreme Chancellor of the Triumvirate behind her. The silence that followed was immediate and electric. Dozens of delegates had already gathered, alerted by panicked messages and curious chatter. Some were perched on floating platforms, others stood rigid in ceremonial robes, their wide eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Even the air in the chamber seemed to pause, waiting. The Chancellor stumbled but managed to stay on his feet as Lenara finally released her grip. His robes, once flawless, were wrinkled and scuffed. His expression was a mix of disbelief and growing fury. You've lost your mind, he said, breathless. You've just destroyed your career. Do you have any idea what you've done? Lenara didn't answer. She walked straight to the control panel built into the railing at the center of the observatory and began entering her override code. Her fingers moved with calm precision. She had made her decision hours ago. There was no going back. The dome above them, hundreds of meters wide and made of reinforced crystal, dimmed slightly as the emergency protocol activated. The view of the stars flickered out, replaced by a massive projection screen stretching across the dome's curve. Everyone in the room turned to look. At first, there was only static. Then, with a final beep, the image came into focus. LSR-4 filled the display, spinning slowly, wrapped in red and gray clouds. A beautiful world, now broken. The seas were churning with acid rain, and the land bore deep cracks like wounds. Fires burned across forests. Lightning storms crawled across the atmosphere. From orbit, the planet looked like it was bleeding. Gasps rose from the chamber. Some delegates stepped forward. A few covered their mouths. The Chancellor took a slow step back, his voice suddenly quieter. This is live? Lenara nodded. 12 hours ago they lost their last climate stabilizer. The evacuation ships are overloaded. People are being left behind. Children, families, entire towns. A few delegates turned toward the Chancellor, silently waiting for his response. Others looked to their aides, whispering in shocked tones. No one seemed to know what to do. For once, there was no scheduled agenda to follow, no set of approved talking points. Lenara turned from the display and faced them. "This is what your silence has done," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. 3 weeks of debates, procedures, and endless formalities, and this is the result. A heavy stillness settled over the room. Lenara walked slowly along the edge of the observation deck, meeting the eyes of as many delegates as she could. "We have the technology to stop this. We have stabilizers, shields, emergency transports. They're sitting in storage because we haven't stamped the right forms." The Chancellor raised his head. "You don't understand what it means to lead, Miss Vale. You can't act based on emotion. Leadership means patience, stability, process." "No," Lenara replied sharply. "Leadership means responsibility. It means action. It means protecting people, not hiding behind paperwork while they burn." One of the delegates, a tall, silver-scaled woman from the Ilari Republic, spoke quietly. "The systems were created to keep peace, to ensure fairness, and they've failed," Lenara said. "Look at that planet. Is that fair? Is that peace? You want to know what Earth's history has taught us? That procedures don't stop disasters. People do. Systems are only good if they serve their purpose, and when they stop doing that, they must change." The Chancellor was silent. Lenara turned back to the display. Streams of data were now running down the sides of the projection. Population loss, rising temperatures, ecological collapse. It was overwhelming, painful to look at, but no one turned away. "I'm not here to take power," Lenara continued. "I'm not here to rewrite your history. I'm here because people are dying, and no one else will speak for them." She pointed to the screen. "That world has less than 70 hours left before it becomes uninhabitable. If we act now, we can save lives. If we wait, we'll have blood on our hands." The Chancellor finally looked up. His voice, though tired, was steady. "The emergency orders require full council approval." Lenara stepped closer. "Then sign a temporary override. You have that authority. You've just never used it." He hesitated. His fingers twitched at his sides. Delegates held their breath. "That authority exists for moments just like this," Lenara said gently. "Please use it." For a moment it seemed he might refuse. Then slowly he nodded to an aide. "Bring the authorization terminal." A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd as the terminal was brought forward. The Chancellor stepped up to it, his hands hovering over the console. The screen lit up with bright text. "Emergency authorization, deployment of crisis resources." He looked at Lenara once more. "You will be responsible for the outcome." "I already am," she said. He signed. The order was sent. Within minutes, messages were going out across the systems. Teams were mobilizing. Stabilizers were being loaded onto transports. Relief ships were being launched. Lenara turned back to the screen. The fires on LSR-4 hadn't stopped yet. But help was finally coming. And for the first time since she'd arrived on Helion Prime, the silence in the room felt like something new. Not fear, not delay, hope. 3 days after the emergency order was signed, the Unity Forum was no longer the same. The Grand Chamber, usually filled with slow speeches and quiet formality, buzzed with a kind of energy no one had felt in years. Delegates from all corners of the galaxy sat straighter in their seats. For once, they weren't just watching, they were waiting for something real. Lenara Vale stood at the Earth delegation station, hands clasped in front of her. She hadn't slept much in the past 72 hours. Reports had been coming in non-stop from LSR-4. The first wave of stabilizers had deployed. Emergency. Transports were landing in hard-hit areas. Lives were being saved. The damage couldn't be undone, but the collapse had been stopped. Today, the Chancellor would speak. and for once the entire chamber was listening. He stood at the central platform wearing simpler robes than usual. His voice was steady but lacked its usual theatrical tone. "The emergency protocols have done their job," he said. "Lives have been saved, but it should not have taken a public confrontation to bring this action about. It should not have taken the dragging of a chancellor through the halls to remind us of our duty." There were a few chuckles, light, careful, but no one disagreed. "We have spent generations building this forum," he continued. "Its rules, its traditions, its structure, they were created to keep peace and order. But something has become clear. When process becomes more important than purpose, we lose sight of what truly matters." Lenara felt her chest tighten. This moment had been building from the first day she set foot on Helion Prime. She didn't know what the Chancellor would do next. Part of her still expected him to defend the system, to brush the whole thing under the rug. But then, he surprised her. "We must change," he said. Not with hesitation, not with endless debate, with intent and courage. He turned to face her. "Ambassador Vale, your actions, though unorthodox, have shown us what happens when urgency meets a broken system. For that, we are grateful." Lenara nodded slightly, unsure of what to say. "That is why I am creating a new position," the Chancellor continued, "Emergency Response Director of the Unity Forum. This individual will have the power to identify critical situations and act immediately, without waiting for full council approval. I appoint Lenara Vale to this role." The chamber burst into sound, gasps, murmurs, a few loud objections. It wasn't chaos, but it was far from quiet. Lenara stood frozen, surprised more than anyone, but slowly she stepped forward and took the central floor. Her voice was calm, but firm. "With respect, Chancellor, I can't accept that." The room hushed again. The Chancellor blinked. "You decline?" "I appreciate the offer," she said, looking around at the faces staring back at her. "But replacing one problem with another isn't a solution. Giving one person the power to act doesn't fix the system. It only creates another system that might fail in a different way." People were whispering again. The Chancellor looked puzzled. "What we need," Lenara continued, "is reform. Not a shortcut. Not a hero. We need rules that actually work when they're needed most. We need procedures that allow for urgent response, but still honor the values of fairness, inclusion, and reason. I'm not here to break the system. I'm here to help rebuild it." A soft voice from one of the floating platforms spoke up. It was Senator Calvin, an elder statesman from the distant Kailari Reach, known for his quiet wisdom. "Then what do you suggest, Ambassador?" Lenara took a breath. "A reform commission. A group from all member worlds focused only on fixing our emergency response system. We keep our traditions, but we modernize them. We keep our rules, but we make sure they serve people first. That way, the next time there's a crisis, we don't wait. We act." This time, the silence in the chamber felt thoughtful. The Chancellor stared at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "You would not accept power even when handed to you." "I don't want power," Lenara said. "I want change." He turned to the room. "Very well. A commission shall be formed immediately. Ambassador Vale will co-chair it." There was a pause. "Alongside Senator Velo of the Central Spiral," he added. A murmur of approval followed. Velo, a highly respected reformer known for her calm efficiency, inclined her head. The Chancellor nodded again. 30 days, that is the timeline. And as motivation, he looked toward Lenara with a rare hint of humor in his voice. "If the commission fails to present a proposal, I will personally allow Ambassador Vale to drag me through the halls once more." The chamber erupted into laughter. Even the usually stoic translators flickered with amusement. Lenara smiled. She hadn't expected to feel hopeful. But standing there, hearing that laughter, seeing the delegates not just listen, but believe, something shifted inside her. Later, she would walk into the newly assigned commission chamber with a fresh slate, surrounded by people who were ready to work. There were disagreements, of course, there always would be. But the silence had been broken and something better was taking its place. For the first time in a long while, the Unity Forum wasn't just a place of speeches and ceremony. It was a place where change had begun. And somewhere, far beyond the chamber walls, the stars watched quietly as the galaxy took a new breath.